Hello and welcome to the Indian Community Podcast. I'm Rahul with my co host Amit, and today we're going to dive deep into fascinating ideas that connect the past with the present. We often look at ancient wisdom as something that is locked away in texts, but today we're going to explore how these age old principles and philosophies might hold answers to some of our modern day challenges.
And to unravel this, we have with us an expert who brings a unique perspective by blending his understanding of ancient Indian texts with contemporary storytelling and real world insights. So let's welcome Sai Chandravadhan Bommadevara, also known as Vadhan. Vadhan is an acclaimed author and executive director at a leading consulting firm. With five published books, he masterfully blends ancient Indian wisdom with modern storytelling, unraveling the mysteries and wonders of India one thriller at a time. Mr. Vadhan's works, inspired by texts like the Vedas and the Upanishads, explore themes ranging from mythology and vigilantism to ancient engineering, making him a unique voice in both literature and professional spheres. So, welcome to the Indian Community Podcast, Mr. Vadhan.
Hi,
Thank you.
thank you so much. It's great to be here, and I consider it both a honor and a privilege to be part of this podcast and to
Mhm.
through you guys to talk to the Indian community globally and to share my humble views in terms of what I have learned about Indian literature and how I use that literature to communicate uh, to the people of today about our wisdom and the wisdom and the culture of this country of the past. So thank you so much for having me here.
Mhm.
Excellent, sir. Sir, it is our honor, sir.
Thank you.
So, you come from a consulting background in professional services, and what inspired you towards writing books and especially in a subject that is so deep and so complex?
Well, let me start by saying that I was a writer first and then a consultant. So that's a story. So I started writing, and I started. So
Okay.
uh, an oft-repeated tale. My interest in Indian literature started when I was a kid, and every one of our grandmothers have gone about telling us stories about the epics, about the kings of old, and the justice system and the kind of equanimity, the kind of love for people that the ancients had in this land, and how governance was something that came out of love and affection rather than fear factor. So uh, so from the throne of Vikramaditya to Rajabhoj, and to from Ramayana to Mahabharata to the various Vedas and the Upanishads and Jataka tales, and so many stories that fill my head. I had my maternal grandmother, my paternal grandmother, and to top it all, I had my great grandmother who used to tell me stories when I was a kid, and I grew up, with all those dreams in my head and all those visions in my head, and so I was an avid reader, right? I used to read. And then one book that I read, not necessarily of Indian origin, by an author called Robert Ludlum, one book that I read, and the movie it ran in my head when I was reading it when I was 12 years old, made me want to switch over from uh, reading to writing. And I wanted to create that kind of an imagery and that kind of a storytelling experience to my readers. So I started writing my first book, believe it or not, when I was 13 years old. So therefore, I was a consultant much later.
That's good.
And I started becoming a writer when I was 13. I never got to finish the book. Actually, I finished that book when I was well past the middle of my 30s. But I started that book so early, at 13, and then I got to finish it, and I got to getting it published uh, by no less than a very, very prominent publisher called Bloomsbury, who also published Harry Potter and all of that. And I was, who believed in my story, in my dream, in what I wrote, and that's how that book came to be. But so therefore, to answer your question, yes, I'm a consultant. Uh, Being a consultant deviated me from my love for literature, I think. But then, yes, that love for literature and the love for storytelling continued from when I was a kid to till today.
What was the name of that book that you started at the age of 13?
It's called Agniputra, and it's based
Agniputra.
Agniputra, and I'm actually now re-releasing it as the Agniputra experiment. And believe it or not,
Okay.
that book uh, came out of two things. One was a recurring nightmare that I used to have when I was a kid. It was a recurring nightmare of me standing against a basement window which looked out into the world, and there's something behind me. It was a nightmare, right? And it used to recur. That was something that instigated me to start this book. And the second thing that started me to write this book is a line from the Yajurveda. There are two Yajurvedas, the white Yajurveda and the black Yajurveda. It's called the Black Yajurveda because it was supposedly written by Lord Krishna, who is supposed to be dark of skin. So the Black Yajurveda. Otherwise, it's got no arcane dark arts to it. But uh, it was written by and there is a line in it which says Agni with one syllable, one sound, which means with one syllable, O-N-E, one syllable, he one sound, which is W-O-N, one sound. So it talks about the first
Mhm.
ever syllable, and it is the first line of the victory incantation of the Black Yajurveda. And it was something that fired my imagination to think, wow, this is the Yajurveda during the Vedic times. These guys are actually talking about the first vibration, because in space there is no sound. In space there's only vibration, and that vibration, according to the
Right.
scientists today, is still echoing. Right. So that one stanza, Agni rekaksarena vakum ud ajayat, Agni with one uh, syllable, one sound, had so much of potential in it that I wrote an 84,000 page book about it. And I mixed that with my nightmare, and that came out as Agniputra. So my first book started when I was 13, ended when I was in my late 30s, and that's how my writing career started actually. But it was the second book to be published. My first book was something else.
Yeah, that's what I thought. I was trying to understand whether the Shatru Chronicles was started at when you were 13, or was it the other one. So that was good. It's a very interesting story. I think there was one really interesting point that you made, where you said that back in the day when they were, they had this knowledge, right? And about space and vibration. Where do you think that knowledge disappeared, right? So, and why? uh, what do you think is the primary cause for that knowledge not being as common as it may have been in those days?
See, there are several factors that I attribute to this. The first and foremost factor is that uh, we kind of somewhere or the other substituted science for superstition, right? Vedic Bharat gave equal credibility to men and women, right? Uh, Vedic Bharat gave a lot of credibility to education and gave a lot of credibility to a particular way of life. And over a period of time, with a lot of influence that came in, first through invaders who were Western. Uh, a lot of that discipline is something that we did not follow through with, right? If you look at even as late as Shivaji Maharaj, that discipline existed. But over a period of time, that discipline faded, and the fact that our literature is mostly word of mouth, or mostly word of mouth. It was not written down, and it passed from word to word, from generation to generation, using something known as mnemonic memory, I think, where you use particular stanzas, you use particular tunes and dictions as flagposts to remember the various stanzas of that literature, the various structure of that literature. And over a period of time, all of that kind of got lost because we moved away from that way of schooling ourselves. There was the first 8 years, the second 8 years of education, the first 8 years of childhood, the second 8 years of education, the third 8 years of finding a job and being a youngster, the fourth 8 years of getting married and settling down in life, the fifth 8 years of growing your children, the sixth 8 years of of uh, retirement, and the seventh 8 years of actually letting go of everything. This was a structure, a social order that was created in the ancient times in order to most effectively and efficiently ensure that we
Mhm.
live a full life and touching all aspects of it. The simple reason is Sanatan Dharma, or Hinduism as it is also called, is just not about God and religion. Though God and religion are a part of it, it is about structure. It's a social order and a philosophy that structures the way in which our life was kind of, woven together. Now, over a period of time, that structure just collapsed, right? Because of many reasons. And the last of those reasons is the advent of the British Empire, where they came and said the only way that we can break these guys is if we break their education system.
Mhm.
And they destroyed the way in which we educated ourselves and trained ourselves, right? So,
Correct.
over a period of time, there was a disintegration of that way of life, which also kind of destroyed whatever knowledge we had there. Ultimately, the Vedas that were translated, which are right now in an institute in Pune, are only a very small portion of the entire texts that were there with us, right? So therefore, these are the some of the contributing factors to what we lost. I mean, if you look at the Vedic times and if you look at what the Vedic masters have said, uh, they have talked in detail about Vimanas. The Rig Veda contains stanzas which talks about the mechanism that goes into a Vimana. And I have used that text in my book, the Vimana transcripts. It's there, it's available, it's been translated by the West, and I have given my own interpretation to it. But these are available, it's there. And right now, rather than us going back and revisiting the whole thing and figuring out what we've got to learn from this, it's actually the West that's doing it. So, I mean, Oppenheimer is one example. Tesla is another example of how Vedic literature and
Yeah.
Sanskrit literature was used to develop science. And Indian literature is heavily dependent on science. We move that to superstition.
Can you elaborate on that Tesla example?
So it's sketchy, but I'll tell you what. I mean, he took on the examples of Akasha. Just to give an example, Akasha to us is sky or the ether, right? He took that as an example. He read through the text and actually found out about magnetism in the ether, electromagnetism, back in the 18th century. There are so many other concepts that he had taken out from this Vedic literature to experiment on them. After the bomb, Oppenheimer moved back into
Mhm.
Sanskrit literature, Sanatan literature, to find solace and peace because he had brought in the worst ever destructive element possible to
Right.
be brought into this world at that time. He became a depressed man, and the only way that he could address his depression
True.
was
True.
through understanding what is the structure. So there are so many such examples. I mean,
Right. Sorry, I thought when you said Tesla, I was.
no, no. I mean the
Because he
scientist
owns it,
Tesla,
because
not
he drives a
not.
Tesla all the time. Actually, in this world, what is happening is, there are two versions of everything now, right? So it's very easy to get stuck in one. And when you were talking about that education part of the British, the way they destroyed the education system, I'll tell you, I mean, when you were narrating everything from the last 10, 15 minutes, I was thinking that being a kid, when you are in your preteens, and I was also at that time a kid only, maybe. I, only would read some comics. And the first real, the interaction of these kind of tales was through a TV show called Singhasan Battisi. Right. It was a Vikramaditya's throne in which there are 32, puppets or putlis or murtis, whatever you say. And then each one narrates its own story. So and that is because, yeah, that is because that everything was taken off, that we were taught to watch TV, that we'll watch TV and learn from there. Reading books, was is not like Vedas. I've never seen a Veda in my life, right? I've never held it in my hand. That what is a Veda like? So yes, British system definitely is to blame. I mean, no doubt. Now I have a question. Your books, I've not actually read them in detail, but I've heard that your books deal with themes like corruption, vigilantism, and also ancient mysteries. So, do you believe that ancient literature and philosophy can offer solutions to modern day problems? And if yes, then with an example, if you could explain how.
Okay, so uh, let me put it this way, Rahul. What we call as the modern day problems are not really the modern day problems. They are versions of the the ancient problems. So I think that is something that we have to be
Hmm.
very clear about, right? Because can only be so many problems. I mean,
Okay.
let's talk about our so-called everything is finite.
Everything is
And
finite.
let's call about a so-called, today's so-called
Yeah.
tolerance or intolerance for the LGBTQ community. Now we are saying that no, we have to
Hmm.
give them the place that they deserve. We've been treating them as, we've been looking down on these community, these people, which is a very fair thing to say. Now you take the Mahabharata. Have you heard of the character called
Hmm.
Brihannala? Right? Have you heard of the
Hmm.
character called Shikandi? Shikandi, I think, is the name. The character that actually kills. The character
Chikhandi
actually
Devas.
that
Yeah.
kills
Chikhandi, yes.
Bhishma, who's reborn neither as a man nor as a woman. Right? Brihannala is a character who is neither a man nor a woman, or
Right.
who is a woman. Uh, Now, who is Brihannala? Brihannala is actually Arjun. Arjun is
Hmm.
cursed when Urvashi falls in love with him and wants to marry him, and he rejects her because he has only motherly feelings for her. Because though she's an apsara, she curses him that you will become a woman and you will suffer the fate of a woman, and he becomes a woman, and that helps him actually during the 13 years of their vanvas. In the final years where they have to be in disguise, Arjuna is disguised as a woman.
Hmm.
He accepts the curse. Right now,
Hmm.
these are concepts which were there, and Mahabharata is supposed to have taken place when some 6,000 years ago. Right? These are concepts which were already
Hmm.
there and concepts that have already been
Hmm.
dealt with, and these
Right.
and that community has been given that kind of respect as to get into an epic and be a strong character in it back 6,000 years ago according to our own literature, right? And therefore that's a lesson that we ought to have used now to
Mhm.
say you cannot treat this community wrong, right? So
Right.
that I think is a standing example of two facts. One is that this is not a problem for the modern times. This problem has already been there. These kind of people have always been there. Bless their souls. And we
Right.
have dealt with them,
Right.
and we needed to bring that wisdom forward now. Have we? Let's talk about
True.
corporate governance. It's a
Absolutely.
present day problem. Corporates are supposed to govern fair,
Hmm.
correct? They have to be fair. They have to you to corporate social
Hmm.
responsibility and
Hmm.
etc. and so forth, and they have to be accountable for themselves. It's a modern day concept, but uh, let me tell you that this modern day concept of
Hmm.
corporate governance is being implemented and executed. It is not voluntary, right? Which means that if you don't comply with the corporate governance norms, you will be punished. Therefore, corporate governance today is a result of
Right.
fear of retribution.
Right.
Whereas if you take, and I'll take, I won't go back to the Vedic
Right.
times here. I can, but let's stick to the 1940s and 1950s, the 1960s, 70s, 80s, and let's talk about the Indian conglomerates which grew up to become world class leaders. Let's talk
Hmm.
about Aditya Birla. Let's talk about the Tatas. Right? I know for a fact that when Aditya Birla opens up by a new factory, the
Correct.
first thing they build is the school. Then they build a hospital. Then they build the quarters for their people to live in, and then they build the factory. Right? Now that is not because
Hmm.
there's a law in India which says that. There was no such law. Right? It is based out of a sense of being community friendly and being all encompassing, right? That
Hmm.
comes from a culture of kingdoms, the culture of Vedic literature, culture of the Sanatan Dharma that they are inculcating in their modern times. So the corporate governance structure in India is completely different from the corporate governance structure of the West. One is instigated by fear, the other is instigated by a sense of duty. And that is the, I think, the biggest example I can give you of how our culture, our
Hmm.
Sanatan Dharma and Sanatan literature has been absorbed by our people of the current generation. I mean, I hope that answers your question. I'm just giving you that example because I'm blending both my experience.
Yes. 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 In a much better way.
Yeah, in fact, that example also, it makes us wonder about what is of importance to a corporate, right? Is it your shareholder satisfaction, or you're talking about the corporate responsibility, right? So, what is more important? Is it the returns on the investment or the responsibility?
No, so let me put it in a different way. Let
Because
me
now,
put it in a different way. Is it shareholder? Is a shareholder important, or is a stakeholder important? See,
Mhm.
any organization interacts with the society.
Right.
Correct. That's how an organization makes money. Right. So if your organization is a circle,
Mhm.
the society is a larger circle, and then it interacts. Now, if you perceive as an organization that your
Hmm.
smaller circle is inside the larger circle and will have to thrive along with the larger circle for you to benefit, then you will do good to your stakeholders.
Mhm.
But
Correct.
if you believe that you are outside
Right.
the larger societal circle and you only interact and exploit to take as much as you can from that circle, then you will only believe in shareholder happiness.
Yeah, we can also say there were two type of kings earlier. One were kings who used to take care of their praja, and the other were kings who used to just conquer and make their kingdom bigger. Exploit, yes.
Sorry, even the kings who used to conquer used to get the wealth of those kingdoms and bring it back to the. Are India, we actually were the people. I mean, if you look at it, we can actually go back and read it also. Are the people who emptied Rome's coffers. Rome
Mhm.
was so rich that once
Oh,
after at one point of time they started importing a lot of stuff from us. We were trading with Rome. And what did we send them? We sent them what was
Hmm.
naturally growing here, spices.
oh,
What did we take in return? Golden coin.
Spices. Correct.
So today you will find Roman coins in India, and their coffers got empty.
that is how we got it.
But
Correct.
that gold came in where? It came into
Oh,
India. India was, and in the ancient world, India was number three or two in the GDP in the world. We were at the top. It's all taken away. See, so that's the way it is. I mean, there's a joke that says that the only reason that the pyramids are still in Egypt is because you couldn't put them inside the museum inside London. So everything from all over the
British Museum. You're referring to the
British
British
Museum,
Museum, where a lot of this
yeah,
is
including the
stored. Yes.
Kohinoor.
In fact, I've also heard that. Correct. The British Museum has only 1% of everything that was taken away from the rest of the world. So a lot of it is not even on display, right? So there's a lot of stuff that's not even on display, that's hidden somewhere. Anyways, I think the in a nutshell, if I think of what you said, right, I feel, there was this recent post by Mr. Sridhar Vembu of Zoho, right, where he was talking about how there are companies that are making a lot of profit. There's they're not in losses. They're doing thousands and millions of dollars in profits, but still restructuring and letting go of thousands of people, right? And saying, okay, in the name of efficiency, right? And where AI is coming in, and they're saying, okay, now we don't need as many people. Now, if I take your example of stakeholder, right? So these are the people who actually helped these
They are the
organizations make that kind of profit.
parasites.
But
They're simply parasites. They are not. See,
correct,
there are two kinds of bacteria in this world, right? Good bacteria and bad bacteria. Right? The good bacteria will help you and keep you nurtured, and it will stay alive. The bad bacteria will only stay alive and destroy you.
correct.
Simple parasites, and it is evident. But then there's nothing we can do.
Because he raised a very good question.
Yeah,
Correct. He raised a very good question in terms of why these
yeah.
companies are not able to, redirect these people into newer ventures, right? And why do we have to let go of thousands of people? And you're hearing about people losing losses, just losing their jobs just before the holiday season, just before Diwali, just before
correct.
Christmas. Thousands of people get, yeah. And this is where I think, as a corporate, it is very important for us to become really responsible about the livelihood of people that work with
Correct.
us.
So again, that's where the culture steps in. The culture will have to step in there. That's where you know millions of years. I mean, how many years should I say? I mean, thousands and thousands and thousands of years of culture that is already brought in as part of you, is in your DNA.
Mhm.
Will have to kick in and say. I mean, as a Sanatan person, will have to say that to me, my happiness is important, and and for my happiness to sustain itself, I must understand that the people around me must be happy. Every dictatorship in this land, every
Correct.
dictatorship in this world has failed because the dictator kept himself happy and everybody around him in poverty. And that will not work, right? And if you want to
Correct.
look at it economically, if you want to look at it and with a little bit of a cultural aspect to it, that economics will have to be built into how you deal with things culturally, right? That's what the our literature tells us to do. That your good is equivalent to everybody's good. Unless everybody is if you're feeding, then you will be fed. And Vasudevam Kutumbakam then comes in and makes it very very clear to you what it means, the implication of Vasudevam Kutumbakam becomes huge.
In fact, that was our first episode. We, that was the reason why we actually started the Indian Community podcast. If you go back and look at our first video, this is exactly what we were talking about, and how the world becomes our family is the core essence of why we started.
Correct.
So, Vadan sir, let me ask you this because you mentioned culture and the importance of culture, right? So, culture in our country, um, sometimes is going to vary every 250 kilometers, right? So you'll see different cultural practices, if I may say. Okay, let me say your cultural practices will change, your languages will change. You'll see something else happening in Rajasthan, and then all of a sudden you go to Madhya Pradesh, it's different, then you go to Maharashtra, it's different. Now how do you distinguish between the core culture and the cultural practice, right? How do you really identify that, or you know create a distinction between them, and then you do a lot of research, bring that research back into your book. So how do you do filter those ideas? So can you take us through some of your processes of filtering an idea and bring it get to life into your
Okay,
book?
I'll break this up into two. The first part is that uh, you said there are different cultures in different parts of the country. I would look at it a little differently. I wouldn't say that there are different cultures. I'd say there are different approaches to the
Mhm.
same culture. And I'll give you an example of that.
Okay.
Diwali is celebrated in the north of Lord Rama returning to Ayodhya.
Hmm.
If you go to the south,
Correct.
Diwali is a celebration of Krishna killing Narkasur. And on the day that Narkasur is killed,
Correct.
Narkasur says, let this day be the day when the entire world celebrates with color and light because you have killed a bad asura like me, and I now realize my mistake, right? So uh, the approach to the festival of lights in the south is different than the approach to the festival of lights in the north, but the festival of lights is the culture, right? So the approaches in different parts of the country may be different,
Right.
but the culture is the same. That's the first the response to the first part of your thing. The second thing is that you said, how do I uh, look at bringing this into my stories? For example, if you, I'll give you examples. I mean, I think it's easier that way. Is that the example I'll give you is if you take my book, the
Perfect.
Vimana transcript, which came out in 2021, I think, and uh, Vimana transcripts is about very simply about based on two things. One is the Vimana as we know it, and secondly, it is based on temple architecture
Hmm.
of India. The temple architecture of India is a separate and an ancient architectural practice. You learn temple architecture. So there is regular architecture and there is temple
Hmm.
architecture for India, right? And uh, so I needed to to make my story conjoin between a Vimana which is considered to be a flying object, and a temple. There are two or three different types of temples in India, and this and in the South India, the temples are called Vimanas, right? So why is it called a Vimana, right? And then what is a Vimana? And then Vimana, a flying aircraft. I mean, there is an 18th
Mm-hmm.
century, 18th or 19th century book about Vimanas that's been written, Vaimanik Shastra or something like that. But then the Rig Veda itself talks about Vimanas and the machination of a Vimana. How, what makes there are a variety of Vimanas described. Vimanas that fly in the air and go in the ocean. Vimanas the size of cities. Vimanas that fly in the air and go on the roads. And we are talking about the Rig Veda, some 8,000 years
Mm-hmm.
ago or 10,000 years ago, because the Vedas precede the epics. Mahabharata and Ramayana came after the Vedas. So we are talking about people having this kind of knowledge back then, and they could not have had this knowledge just by sitting back, putting their looking up at the sky and figuring out that there's something called a Vimana. There had to be something that made them see that, experience it. Otherwise, you can't say how a Vimana functions, what engine it has. They are talking about fusion fuel.
Mm-hmm.
The Rig Veda actually talks about fire and water as fusion fuel for the Vimana,
Mm-hmm.
something that is science fiction to us today, right? So, for my story, I had to do research in terms of, hey, I've heard of Vimanas. We still have Vimanas where,
Hmm.
Jet Airways and this and that, and, Indigos of the world and the Air Indias of the world. So, how did we even
Right.
get the word Vimana back in the day? How did they understand it? Where did they go? And I started digging.
Correct.
I started reading about it, and it landed me in the Rig Veda of all things, right? And it clearly, that I mean, I was amazed that this is not some stanza that I'm talking about, or some verse that I'm talking about which nobody has heard of. This has been interpreted in the West.
Hmm.
This particular thing about the Vimana is an interpreter. Some people say no, no,
Mm-hmm.
it talks about calendar. But some people say no, 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 it talks about a Vimana. And then there are so many explanations given to a Vimana. And unless those people, the ancients, are actually seen them,
Mm-hmm.
I started believing that it could not have been, because we are only what we experience, right? We experience,
Right.
before we experience salt
Right.
as children, as babies, we don't even know what salt is. Everything is experience. Now that we are used to salt, if you take away the salt, we
Correct.
can't live with it. So everything is about experience, and unless you see, unless you enjoy, unless you are able to
Mm-hmm.
actually understand what you're seeing, you could not have documented it. And that made me write this
Correct.
book. Now it's a story. It's a complete story of fiction. It's a thriller. It's fast paced. It's an action. But somebody has to go figure out, there's something that is stored inside a Vimana. They Unless they figure out what it is, and it's a tattva. A tattva is a principle, right? Just a tattva
Hmm.
inside a Vimana that you have to find out. You have 3 days.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, your world is going to get destroyed. That's the story. But within that story, there's so much to exploit in terms of looking at what kind of, I mean, we are a land of storytellers here. We are a land of storytellers. We are a land
Right.
of people who have stories. There are 1,600 languages in this country. Every language has its own culture. Every culture is based on its stories. So imagine the stories that we have,
Correct.
right? And there is no dearth of knowledge in terms of what we can pick up and what we can write on and how we can apply it to modern times. It is, I mean, once you open your eyes to the possibilities of what kind of literature we have, we don't have to look anywhere. and it all applies.
So I loved your example of salt and experience, and thinking about the the concept of Vimana. We have all seen the Ramayana and the
The Pushpak
Pushpak
Vimana,
Viman. We all know that
Jatayu
the
was cut
Pushpak Viman,
from the Pushpak
uh, you
Viman.
know, cut, and Sita Ma was abducted, and she was taken from India to Sri Lanka on a plane. Right? We have all seen this. We have all seen Ramayana growing up, and we've all seen that. And a lot of people could not connect the dots that hey, there was some technology, right, or some awareness of technology or the possibilities of this technology.
Because you'll have to understand the time at which this story was told. This story is supposed to have happened some 8,000 years ago. Forget everything. Let us say that Valmiki lived. Let us assume that Valmiki lived just 1,500 years ago. Yeah, 1,500 years ago. Who knew a flying aircraft? Who knew? Right? Even Tipu Sultan, who lived back in the 17th century or something, if you go and did he know about a Vimana? He didn't. I mean, if you go and show him an automatic weapon today, it is magic to him.
No. True.
So, unless you have seen it, you could not have, you could not have built on it. No, you could not have developed it. You could not have actually explained what it was. That's the mystery.
Yeah, and now that you say this, I'm wondering when can we see a thriller web series or a movie based on your ideas? Do you have any?
See, most producers say,
Yeah.
"Boss, your ideas are too expensive to produce."
No, in the age of AI, I think we can reduce some of the
I
production
know,
costs, right?
I
So
know.
we
I think that's a great idea. Yeah.
Because what is happening is they're only thinking about the future, right? Like they make shows like Interstellar.
correct.
That's not a cheap show to make, right? But they're spending everybody's this money is being spent on it. But when it comes to the past, so that is called as a story, right?
No, so yeah, you. So, and you know what? I mean, funnily, uh, uh, the mainstream Western movie business would rather adopt a Greek mythology and make
Hmm.
a Clash of the Titans, or adopt Roman mythology and create a Ben-Hur or whatever. But they would not adopt a Eastern mythology because it's all alien to them. They did not grow up on it. They wouldn't know, right? So first of
Right.
all, to get the concept through to them will by
Right.
itself be difficult. And as far as the our desi producers are
Right.
concerned, they'd like to rather make some mishmash of it and destroy the whole thing. I mean, some of the movies that they make in the name of even fantasy thrillers based on Indian mythology today in India, uh, you know, all fantastic special effects and etc. But then there is no
Hmm.
backbone to it. There is no research. I mean, if you look at the research that went into The Hobbit, or the research that went into The Lord of the Rings, the research that went into Harry Potter, and a lot of Harry Potter's
Hmm.
uh, theories come out of our philosophy. But still, that kind of that they don't believe in that kind of research, or they don't believe that they have an audience which is intelligence enough to understand that kind of a research. So we are left with watching some very dumb movies, unfortunately. I'm sorry, but that's the prognosis that I have. I may be completely wrong.
Yeah.
That's the
I'm going
truth.
to put
That
this
is the
up
truth.
in into the world out there, right? And maybe hope for it to happen, right? So I'm hoping that Karan Johar or Ekta Kapoor, get a hold of your books and get inspired to start creating themes around this, or maybe reach out to you, and maybe we would love to see some of these ideas being presented back for the younger generation to think about, right? So we've seen in the recent past there have been some attempts made to, like, I was watching this movie the other day, Singham, the latest version of Singham,
Good God.
by Rohit Shetty. And so they're they're taking people onto a tour of Sri Lanka. So forget the, we are not going to debate on the whether the
I haven't
movie is
seen it,
good
so
or
I
bad.
can't
I
debate.
think it was,
I didn't see it yet. So
yeah, I think they were referring to some of the incidents that were
in
happening, and they were
Ravan.
kind of relating it to the Ramayana. But yeah, but I think what was most important in that movie were showing some of those places like that Ram Setu, and the Ashok Vatika in Sri Lanka, the mountain in Sri Lanka where the Sanjeevani
Good.
Booty is
But
there.
have you
So
seen the movie Ram
they were
Setu
showing
itself?
those examples.
Have you seen the movie Ram Setu itself? Akshay Kumar's
Uh,
Ram Setu.
Akshay Kumar, yes, I've seen
Ram
that.
Setu.
Yes,
That also takes you on a tour. It's more of a, they took it more as a documentary, but then it actually takes you through Sri Lanka, through the tunnels,
correct,
through the caves, through where his palace was.
correct,
So
correct.
honestly, I mean,
Yeah,
if you
so
ask me
that's really important.
as a mythological character, if you ask me, I am a very very big fan of Ravan. I'm a very big fan of Ravan. Yes, his I think his basic fatal flaw, his catharsis was that he was an extremely egoistical man, right? But his people lived in a golden time during his lifetime, and he's supposed to have lived for 1,26,000 years before Rama was born,
Correct,
right? And he's written that Shiva Stotam, the Shiva Stuti, what is it called? Stotra, which is even sung today in the temples of Shiva. It's supposed to be very famous. In every temple of Shiva, it's like he's supposed to be one of the greatest devotees of Lord Shiva, right? And Ravan was born as a curse. Actually, if you look at the backstory of Ravan, it was a curse to Ajaya and Vijaya, who are the gatekeepers of Vaikunt.
correct,
They were cursed by
gatekeepers.
the Brahmaputras because they
Correct,
didn't allow them to come in, that they will be born on earth 7 times. And then Vishnu says, okay, you can be born thrice,
correct,
provided that all 3 times you will be my enemy. So Kumbhakarna and Ravan were actually Ajaya and Vijaya, who die at his hands.
correct,
Right? So, I mean, if you look at the
right,
backstories of that, look at the backstories they made. I mean, to me, what an author, Valmiki. I mean, what an author. I mean, if you even if you think of it as fiction, it's brilliant fiction here. Unbelievable fiction.
right. It is interesting, and I think a lot of your ideas give me goosebumps, right? So every time I'm thinking of them now, I'm like, oh my god, this is hysteric, right? Um, if there was one message from the ancient wisdom that you've collected all these years, right? If you had to leave our listeners with that one message, what would that be?
It is a very important message to the world right now. Vasudevam Kutumbu. Please understand the definition, the real meaning